Hello, hello. Today's guest is Costa Lavigne-Thomas. Costa is a friend of mine who I met through Ralston College, a new institute dedicated to restoring humanities to their proper place in higher education. He's quite the adventurous character. Having grown up hitchhiking across his home state of Washington, he's lived off the grid in a cabin in the woods, studied music in a French conservatory, hitchhiked across China, and worked on a farm in Mexico. He is, in many ways, what the adventurous side of myself has always aspired to be. So with all of that said, allons-y, and I hope you enjoy.
Like to interview with someone kind of as a practice run, or do you plan on publishing these at some point?
These I'll probably publish, just because
Okay.
I think it's good to get something out there and edit them and iron out all the kinks right now. That's kind of what I'm doing. When I recorded with Nate, I actually forgot to hit record on my camera, so I only have audio for Nate as well. So things along those lines. Learning to go to a place, set up the mic, set up the camera, set up the lighting, all those things as well. Scheduling and learning all the stupid stuff that you don't want to deal with when you romanticize about having a podcast one day.
Well, you get rich enough, you get someone else to just take care of that for you.
Exactly. Shove this under here so we don't have to deal with it.
Cool.
Just so you know, it is recording right now.
Sweet.
But, I'm just trying to talk and get comfortable and whatnot.
Right on.
That's what I found to be the most difficult thing when talking to the couple people that I have thus far. It's making sure they're comfortable. I'm comfortable too. So,
Just because of the self-consciousness of realizing that you're being
Being
recorded,
recorded,
and
right.
everything you say is permanently ingrained on history
Right.
for everyone to see.
so I have to kind of say, if you want to, then I'll send it to you before I publish it, and you can veto it if you want, or
Sure.
throw in some editing suggestions or whatever. And
Yeah, it's funny. It's different because because it's spontaneous, it's different. If I'm sitting down and writing a book, I can kind of really,
you can make a mistake and then just edit out the mistake.
yeah, you can just think really hard about the structure of every sentence, every paragraph,
Right.
every word that you use.
But
This
this
is just off the cuff. I might say something horribly
Right.
stupid or offensive.
Right.
Who knows?
Well,
Who knows?
I at least have the ability to edit that out if I want to.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about doing some type of live stuff one day, but right now I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
comfortable in front of the mic. What do you make of all the travels that you've done so far? Because one thing that I've sort of realized in all of my travels, especially within the last year and a half, I think I've sort of come to the conclusion that it isn't a good thing. I think it's
Interesting.
better for people to settle down.
Interesting.
And I don't want to downplay the travels that I've had so far, because I've learned a whole lot doing them.
Yeah.
But the conclusion that I've come to is that it's better to settle down. So I imagine you'll disagree with that. And I'm
I don't
curious.
know. I mean, do you mean one should not travel in general? Like, it's kind of an
No, I don't want to
inherently-
say it's a bad thing, because there are good things about it. I just think it's better to settle down. I think it's in the amounts of good traveling is for you. Settling down has
And that's true.
more good points. So
That's true in general, even for like a 19-year-old or something. Like, in general, it's better
I think
to,
so,
to
yes.
not pursue travels.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. I really admire people who spend their whole life in one place.
Yep.
And they really, especially in cases when their family has been there for generations.
Sure.
And they know the land, they know the history, they know the local lore, and they belong somewhere. I think that is a really massively powerful thing that a lot of humans in history have had, that sense of belonging to a place, and that people today don't. And so it's on the one hand, it's this wonderful thing where we can travel anywhere in the world and we can see any culture, and we have so much available to us. But I think a lot of people feel kind of homeless because of that at the same
Sure.
time.
Do you think that's a consequence of kind of what America is, being the land of immigrants? That if you come here you come here because you want to get away from whatever's going on in Europe or Mexico or Asia, depending on what border you enter, say?
I mean, the case is fundamentally different in the United States just because it's not, unless you're native, of course.
Sure.
Nobody has been here for that
Right.
many generations, so you
Right.
don't have that feeling of someone who's been in Japan, whose family has been in one town in Japan since literally time immemorial.
Right.
So that experience just isn't really possible in the United States.
when I was in Mexico, visiting family, I would often ask some of my family members, "Where are you from?" And that'd be "De donde eres?"
Mm-hmm.
They usually interpret that, they understand that as "Of whom are you from?" Like what family members are you related to? That I'll understand. So to position you within the family tree.
Interesting.
Then I would have to say no, de que lugar, and kind of specify it a little more, because they would look at me dumb and say, "Oh, I'm from Juventino. I'm from this town." As
Right.
if it was just a given.
Right.
I don't think that's the case with anyone in America. We are kind of.
It's definitely not a given. And when you first
Yeah.
meet someone, you never
Right.
assume that they're from that place.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I don't know, what, do you lose something? I think you lose something, but you also, to argue against my original point, you gain something from travel and seeing other
Oh,
things
yeah.
too. I mean, I have learned way too much maybe on all of my travels, seen so much, that especially going out and then coming back to
Oh, yeah.
the South and
Yeah.
realizing what I've taken for granted and whatnot.
Yep, definitely.
In terms of the amenities, like having heating in Mexico. Like it's one thing not to have air conditioning, but in the winter it's not as cold there, but you're always 50 degrees. Like it's not you go out and you get cold for 30 degrees for an hour or whatever, and then you come back in and get warm. It's just always
Yeah.
really uncomfortable.
Yeah, you get used to it. Yeah, I think part of the reason I was saying that I have some respect and maybe even envy for people who situate themselves in one place and really belong there is that as much as I admire that, it's not my style of life.
Sure.
Nor do I think it should be. I don't think it's a vice necessarily. But it's the same thing like with people. I also envy people that are really, really skilled playing one instrument. Like someone who's been playing the violin since he was 6 years old or something like that. And like that's his instrument. I can play a bunch of instruments kind of decently, but I don't really have one instrument. And that's another instance of that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what do you learn? I feel like I have no idea. I feel like I've learned tons from traveling.
A lot of it is recontextualizing.
Yeah.
Given that I'm from the South,
Yeah.
recontextualize some of the manners and politeness that go along with being in the South, as opposed to going to New York. People kind of rat on New York for everyone being mean, but I just find that New Yorkers are nice, but they're not exactly going out of their way to say please and thank you and whatnot. They'll be a little curt, but they're still very genuine and very
Different manners,
willing to
yeah.
show you around and all of those things. Yeah.
It's funny how it works in reverse too. I remember when I came back from living in France for 3 years, and I was working at a used bookstore in the United States again quickly after coming back. And there are certain mannerisms that are natural to French culture, which we don't have in the States, and that I had kind of integrated into my sense of normal.
Wow.
And so I remember when I was working at that used bookstore, and people would come up and they would ask where a book is, or if we have a certain book, or some kind of question like that, but they wouldn't greet me first. Like in France, you would never do that. It would be
Really?
insane to go up to a person and just ask for something. Say, do you have this? Without first saying, hello, excuse me, sir, do you know if you
Yeah.
have this book? And I found that just repulsive. I just couldn't stand it. I found
Sure.
it so unbelievably jarring and rude that someone would just come up to me and ask me a question without greeting me in some sense to start off the conversation.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in the South too. I remember coming to Savannah after Greece and whatnot, and everything we did with Ralston at the beginning, and standing at the laundromat, the person in front of me was sitting there and having a conversation with the cashier, and I was there, paying customer, having to wait for the conversation to finish. I was blown away by that in some sense.
Where did you say that was?
Just a laundromat a couple blocks over. Here in Savannah.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe that.
Right.
Kate kind of noticed the same thing in Greece when she was pregnant over there. That people treated her like a queen. Everyone was willing
I remember
to
that.
hold the doors open and drive her around, and everyone was very, very accommodating. And then you get to the States, and that's definitely not the case.
Right.
I think I've kind of seen that with how people have treated my mom too. It doesn't seem like we respect mothers the way at least they did in Greece to Kate. So.
Interesting.
So you're going to be a father soon. Do you have any thoughts on that thus far with Hannah, or?
I am going to be a father soon. I feel. I guess I notice some kind of deep psychological changes occurring, kind of very slowly unfolding.
Within yourself, you mean?
Yeah, within myself. But I think I know it will be a massive transformation of kind of my whole world, of my sense of myself, of my place in the world, of my responsibilities. And I can kind of theorize about what I think that will be like, but when it comes down to it, it's just, I know 6 weeks from now, everything will be extremely different, and I can't really know exactly how.
That's when she has the baby, 6 weeks from now?
A month from now, she's due.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what have you noticed thus far about yourself, then?
I don't know. I haven't actually spent any time trying to formulate it into words, and I'm not sure that I can.
Okay. Then, can you give me the emotions? Are you scared? Are you excited?
No, not scared.
Not scared?
A little bit excited.
Okay.
Almost more like a kind of loving resignation, I would say. Like, this is just kind of calmly noticing myself stepping into a new role in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
A little bit somber in a way, I guess, but in a kind of a pleasant way, a very peaceful way.
What would you be somber about then?
I think just somber the way, in a very appropriate way, the way that passing through any kind of rite of passage is always, it's thrilling, but there's a kind of somber element to it, I think. Like, in a sense, your previous self is dying, the world that you have inhabited thus far is dissolving, and you're stepping into something new, into fresh skin.
Then
it's kind of a serious thing in a way.
Well, when I hear something like that, I assume myself and others would be scared about something like that. But you're approaching it from maybe not approaching it, but you're feeling a loving disconnection, loving moving on.
There's a certain element of fear. And again, I think it's just kind of like the natural. I think that's something that I don't know much about, but it's, speaking of things that are missing from our culture, I think rites of passage are a really big deal to deliberately contextualize a change in yourself and your world. We can talk about, I kind of gave myself a rite, I created for myself a kind of rite into passage when I was like 14 or 15 years old.
Okay.
And talk about that later maybe. But there is something scary about it, and it's this wonderful opportunity to just kind of step into the new world with love and resignation despite the fear.
Okay.
I mean, there's a wonderful. I think fear is kind of. I think if you're not feeling fear on a regular basis, you're probably just not living very well.
Okay. So I was going to go into rites of passages, but now I want to poke at that some. So, why do you think fear is necessary then?
Well,
or
it's almost more like it's evidence. It's not necessary. It's that if you're growing steadily, if you're evolving, you're constantly pushing past what previously was the limits of whatever context you're talking about, whether you're
pushing towards the unknown, you mean?
Towards the unknown in some way, or just past the boundary. Say, I'm in compassion, for example, learning to express compassion in an ever-widening concentric circle, learning to experience solitude in greater and greater capacities. I mean, you can look at it from a million different points of view, but no matter what you're doing, there's always some kind of limit to how much of that you can handle. And if you're growing, then that limit is always being pushed a little bit.
Sure.
And you're always in a kind of constant state of some kind of fear. I think that's how it should be anyways.
What do you lose if you're not pushing yourself beyond that extra boundary, going into that unknown?
What do you lose?
Yeah. What if you try to?
You stagnate. And that's fine, I guess. I mean, you stay in one place. You get a lot, actually. It's easier to say what you benefit from that. You benefit from
expanding yourself, you mean?
Well, you benefit from not expanding yourself.
You think so?
In a way, yeah. I mean, you get comfort. You get the illusion of having a precise understanding of who you are. The people in your world get the illusion of having a precise understanding of who you are. You're not challenging yourself. No one else is being challenged by you. Everything is very stable because it is very static. So, I mean, you get a hell of a lot. I have a friend who, I don't really like this terminology, but actually the man who owned that bookstore that I used to work at, he would always say that you have to choose between a comfortable life and an interesting life. I don't know if I like that dichotomy exactly. I think I would say something more like you have to choose between a comfortable life and an honest life. But I think there's something to that comfort is, I mean, you can be comfortable, but you're going to have to, you're certainly going to lose something there.
Well, couldn't I just push back and make a straightforward argument to say that if you push too far, then you're dead, and then it's over, right?
Yeah.
So to make it interesting, it could be too interesting. But then you said truth or an honest life. Sorry.
Honest, yeah.
Why do you say honest?
I guess I think anyone who is certain about anything, I won't say anyone, most of the time that somebody is certain about something, I think they're lacking honesty. Because I think far fewer things in the world are certain than we tend to think that we are. So then we tend to think are. So just to go back to that example of your sense of self, who I am, what I like, my place in the world, my duties, the sense of my ego. Do I know who I am? I mean, to a certain extent, I think I do. But I also feel pretty sure that if I keep growing, my sense of self will expand indefinitely until the day that I die.
Sure.
So I don't think there's really a boundary to it. So if I am choosing to remain static for the sake of stability and comfort, and choosing to kind of clearly draw lines of delineation within the boundaries of myself and my responsibilities and all of that, and having a very strong sense of who I am, or what the world is for that matter. In a sense, I'm denying myself the possibility to expand my understanding of myself and the world.
Okay.
So maybe honest isn't quite the right word.
But it's better than true, which I almost gerrymandered in there, because that goes back to what you were saying about certainty, and there's almost a Socratic element of what you're saying, that you have to recognize that you know nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And a humbling aspect as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very possible to go too far with that as well. Like I kind of like the way I've been reading The Republic, and kind of the way Thrasymachus is criticizing Socrates. He's saying, all right, Socrates, it's great, you can sit back there and criticize everyone else's point of view, but can you actually say anything? Do you have your own perspective on this matter?
Sure.
And eventually he does, obviously, but I think that's a legitimate critique as well, and I tend to, personally, I probably err too far on that side of saying, like, assuming that I and everyone around me knows less than I and everyone around me thinks that they do.
Sure.
And kind of, in a different way, kind of settling into a posture of constant inquiry, of constant skepticism, of a kind of reluctance to settle into anything. I guess that goes back to traveling versus settling, we were talking about at the beginning.
But to even build on that, though, you also said that you've expanded yourself as a consequence of getting ready to have a baby. So when it comes to traveling versus settling down, there is still this element where you're in the unknown because you are settling down.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah, in a way that is exactly what's happening right now. If I'm stepping into the unknown today, in the following couple months, in becoming a father, beginning something of a domestic life, far more than I would be stepping into the unknown if I were to go hitchhike around Mongolia or something like that. I mean, I've done that. I haven't hitchhiked around Mongolia. I've hitchhiked around China and Europe and all kinds of places, but I've experienced that before. I know what it's like to feel just utterly lost in an utterly foreign place. Right. Not knowing where I'm going to sleep that night, not knowing if anyone's going to come pick me up, just being utterly kind of vulnerable to the world. Sure. I've had that experience, and I'm glad that I've had that experience. And a part of me is bummed out that I'm probably not going to have more of that experience in the next couple of years. But in a way, that's the much truer adventure, is stepping into this new role. And there's this, I guess that it has a lot to do with looking at my life from a sense of a responsibility to the world rather than as a consumer of the world. Like there's all kinds of exciting shit out there I could go experience, but I mean that's only so fun for so long. Eventually, the more fulfilling experience is to think about what you want to contribute.
True.
There's a great quote from which I read this years ago, and it's stuck with me, from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is that it doesn't matter what you expect from life. What matters is what life expects from you.
True.
And so that
Why?
it's had a big influence on me.
Why do you say that? I mean, couldn't I just say it's better to push the argument, to live hedonically, to go live while the getting's good, live in the now, and to hell with responsibility. Like why you say responsibility? Why do you say contribute? You said contribution too.
Yeah. I don't know if I would say that it's. In a way, I think it's just wiser hedonism. I think people that spend their lives just chasing new thrills aren't actually as deeply fulfilled as somebody who has a strong sense of purpose and responsibility and is fulfilling that purpose.
Yeah. That's kind of the conclusion that I've come to with my recent travels, because I feel like I could push that farther and head back into Mexico and head out of the town I was mostly staying in Mexico and see what I can go. But it seems like it's so. For example, my grandfather sent some clothes and some things. It looked like he picked up from some thrift store down to his family in Mexico, our family in Mexico, and we had this little get together where we were giving out all the clothes kind of randomly, so it seems fair. And to see this, all the smiles on those family members' faces, kids and adults, like I can see why people say giving, it makes you happy to give to others, because those smiles, I can see why that would be addicting. I can see why people spoil their kids too.
Yeah,
to be
for
fair.
that same kind of reason.
Right. But you were saying compassion earlier. Maybe there's something like, maybe it's something like there's responsibility in compassion. When you're giving to others, there's a compassionate element there. I don't know. Yeah. I think compassion has sort of been pathologized nowadays. There's this.
Oh, interesting. In what way?
Oedipal mothers are the best example. Looking and searching for victims, if not forcing one where there isn't, and then.
Oh, I think the idea of compassion has been corrupted.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Oh no, wait. Let me push on that. Why do you say the idea of compassion there?
Because I think, well, I don't know if I want to get too far into political stuff, but I think there's compassion has been trademarked essentially as like a kind of a buzzword which should dictate our political happenings. It should dictate our lives in a very specifically prescribed kind of a way.
What's that kind of a way? It seems to me that it's elevated as the highest virtue nowadays. Compassion before anything, before being mean, before telling the truth, before handling bad guys, say.
Yeah, I don't know if they're mutually exclusive. It's funny that you say the handling bad guys thing. I feel like that's another sense in which, like, in a way that kind of like extreme Socratic openness that's natural to me and probably goes so far as to be a vice sometimes also results in me feeling like I can empathize with all kinds of horrible people, and I can understand the perspectives of all kinds of horrible people whose perspectives I don't really want to understand necessarily. Okay. So that's a very valuable thing in a way, but it's also that can definitely go too far when, as you said, there comes a time when sometimes you just gotta handle a bad guy. Right. Sometimes you just gotta set the compassion aside, set the understanding aside, and say something needs to be taken care of here. I'm gonna take care of that.
Do you think that there's a link between, say, compassion and then traveling? Because if you're trying to go out and understand the world, and maybe you can come to understand a bad guy, at some point you put your foot down and you handle the bad guy. You have to make a judgment call. You have to settle down. Do you think? Am I making a logical leap there?
I don't know. In a way, you're settling down on
On a judgment.
course of action. Yeah, a
Right.
judgment. You're saying, okay, in this particular situation, I'm going to cease to try to see every perspective, and I'm going to act on my perspective right now.
Right.
There's a wonderful, Hemingway said something wonderful about that. He said it, I think, in the reverse order because he was talking about writing, but he said something like, as a writer, I understand the perspective of everybody. As a man, I know and enact what is right.
Sure.
And that's something that's really, really powerful for me, because the former stance in the world is something that's really natural to me, but there also comes a time when, like Socrates, just kind of Socrates criticizing everyone else's perspectives but not having anything of his own to say. That only goes so far. Sometimes you gotta actually do something, not just understand everything.
Sure. And of course, that can be taken too far in the opposite direction too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it often is. Yeah, I mean, I admit that I probably lean too far in the other direction, but the world as a whole, I think most people probably tend to feel too certain of everything.
Think so?
Yeah, and they spend too much time acting, maybe not enough time reflecting.
Why do you say that? Why do you say most people?
It's just my experience interacting with most people. I mean, certainly spending any time on the internet exaggerates that beyond the reality of what it actually is. But everyone seems to be 100% certain about everything all of the time. I mean, that's my experience. That's kind of a cartoonish version of my experience of a lot of people.
Okay.
Most people are not willing to really question or really to entertain the possibility that they might be wrong about something that is important to them. And if no one's willing to entertain the possibility that they might be wrong, then everyone is right and nothing.
Right.
No one
then
understands.
Contradictions start to pop up all everywhere.
Yeah.
And no one can communicate with one another. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see why you think that on the internet, because if you think you're right, you're either going to do nothing or you're going to post a comment or whatever. But if you think you're wrong or you're questioning yourself, you're only going to not post something. I mean, maybe you could ask a question.
Yeah.
But it's
the internet is not the place for real discourse.
Right. But you also said people that you know. I mean, I don't want to. You don't have to say any names, obviously, but I don't know. When I talk to people, I often find them uncertain. So
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's because
no. What I said is totally unfair to a lot of people that I know personally, but that's my critique of, I don't know, a lot of people in general. Sure. I should say.
You're old. Can I ask how old you are?
I am 25 years old.
Okay, so you're not actually that much older than me.
Yeah.
The crowd of people I interact with tend to be college kids. So.
As in younger than you?
Yeah.
Or
around my age or younger. And,
okay.
They're all of them, I think, just with very few exceptions, are all lost and uncertain. I mean, maybe they won't always admit that, but it seems to me that it's.
And the way you say that, I think you mean not in a positive sense, not in an epistemically humble sense, but
right.
in a directionless kind of a sense.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I think I've been leaning more towards settling down, because it seems like that's a good direction. I don't want to say necessarily a good direction, but it's a direction at the very least.
Yeah.
And it's good to have a direction, even if it's maybe not even if it's a bad one, but even if it's a mediocre one, say.
Yeah.
I think people are better off that way.
I mean, traveling around doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a direction. It certainly can if you're just kind of bumming around and letting the world take you where it wants.
Sure.
And that's a fun experience in its own way. But it's, I mean, you can have the direction of traveling around South America and just trying to understand the history and the culture of that place through the people you encounter hitchhiking and they invite you into their homes. I mean, that can be a very real kind of maybe a mission is a strong word, but it can be a genuinely fulfilling, edifying kind of an experience.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're directionless necessarily.
Can I ask why it is you started to travel and how it is you ended up in China and Mexico and France and etc.?
How did I start to travel? I don't know. Did I travel much as I didn't travel internationally much as a kid. I went to France when I was 2. My mom is from France, so we traveled there as a family, but I don't have any memory of that.
Sure.
Traveled to Mexico once or twice as a teenager. And then when I was 17, I decided to move to France.
Okay. So, on what grounds did you? Was it a whim? Was there an argument? Had you been thinking about this for years?
Pretty much a whim. I mean, I had always felt that I wanted to see everything there is to see and know everything there is to know, and I kind of wanted to travel to every country in the world. My goal for a long time, and I still a part of me still hopes I can do this someday, but I might have to sacrifice it, is to circumnavigate the world hitchhiking.
Oh man, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, maybe I'll still do it sometime. I don't know. Maybe I'll go with my infant daughter.
It's a great idea.
So I think that's kind of an innate characteristic in me, is the desire to experience a lot of things and to know a lot of things and to explore. So it was kind of a whim when I was 17. I had just finished I was about to finish my junior year of high school and decided that I just didn't feel like doing the senior year. I didn't feel like I was going to get much from it, and so I went to France instead. Decided succeeded in convincing my parents to allow me to do that. Found a little music conservatory in eastern France where I contacted a professor of percussion, and he said that they would arrange an audition for me. And so they arranged an audition on the vibraphone. I performed the vibraphone.
So you already had experience on the vibraphone?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't my main instrument, and it's still not, but I had some experience. I'm not sure why I decided to reach out to the percussion professor, actually. I'm much more of a guitarist than a percussionist. But just on a whim, I reached out to that guy, and he got me into the school. He found me a place to live over there. Just kind of some random guy I met via email. He just kind of set up this whole life for me in there. It was kind of magical.
Wow.
I didn't speak a word of French. I spoke a handful of words of French.
Sure.
That's about it. And then I went there. I never took French classes, but I was taking music classes in French right away.
Wow.
So I just kind of slowly learned that way.
Was that intimidating at first, being in a class? I mean, I was intimidated going to Greece and having Greek classes right out of the gate, despite all the students speaking English.
Yeah. Was it intimidating? I felt it wasn't. I didn't feel scared to do it, but it was very, very difficult once I was there.
Yeah.
It was more difficult than I expected it to be, actually. I've become a progressively less and less timid person over the course of the last 10 years, probably. Sure. So at the time, a kind of a deep timidness paired with not speaking the language whatsoever just made it a very isolated time in general.
Sure. How did you come to pick up the language? I mean, you were in class. Does that mean you would take notes in English or in French? How would your day-to-day life look while acquiring French?
It was, so I was taking classes. I often would understand maybe 10% of what was said in the class, mm-hmm. but I was just constantly exposed to it.
Sure.
I had some one-on-one classes in which the professor would speak very, very slowly and kind of try to mime things out to try to explain what he meant. And then what else? I was living with a French family, so I was trying to speak with them. I was reading some. I was studying. I never took formal classes, but I studied some grammar just online.
Okay.
Just out of my own interest, trying to understand why things worked the way they did.
So just standard full immersion.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then I eventually got to a very high level in the language, and I got a job at a little sandwich shop, which was great because it forced me to spend a lot more time talking to people than I normally would otherwise, both with my coworkers and with the people I was selling sandwiches to. So that was really, really, really helpful.
Okay. To go back, you said for 10 years now, mm-hmm. you've become increasingly less timid. Mm-hmm. And you said so that puts it at 15.
Yeah,
you also said that you had a rite of passage. You said a rite of passage for yourself at 14. So did that have anything to do with you being less timid?
I don't know.
And what did that rite of passage look like?
I actually can't say that I recall the rite of passage, actually doing anything for me. Like it's not like I remember my life like before that and after that or anything.
Okay.
It's just kind of that would be cool if it were if it were that way.
Sure.
But no, I just felt like I wanted to have that experience of a rite of passage. So I had my sister and her boyfriend at the time kayak me out to a little island off the coast of a larger island off the coast of the Washington State. And they just kayaked me out there. I think the kayak only held 2 people, so I think I was actually like sitting on top of the kayak.
Sure.
But then they just dropped me off there, and I spent 3 nights there.
14 years old.
Yep.
Wow. So, what did that involve? Did you hunt? Did you
No.
eat berries? Gather? What?
I just laid in my hammock and looked at the sky pretty much for 3 days.
Gotcha.
I set up a hammock. I didn't really do much of anything.
No.
I don't think I swam. I had a little bit of food with me. I would eat. I made a fire at night,
Yeah.
and spent a lot of time. I was just curious what it would be like to be by myself for.
So it wasn't
For
like
an
a
extended period of
survival element. It was.
No.
Can you stand alone?
No, if I were to do it again, or if I were to create a rite of passage for a son or something, I would do it differently.
Yeah.
I'd probably have to be a little bit more of a survival kind of a thing. I think that would be a lot more interesting.
Sure.
A lot more of a genuine rite of passage, actually. If you kill a deer with a knife or something like that, that's
Sure.
a pretty serious, probably a pretty intense experience that I've never experienced, but I imagine it changes you in some way.
Sure.
No, so from the perspective of what it is that a rite of passage is supposed to do, I don't know if it was all that effective. I was just kind of trying to improvise something for myself.
Okay.
I think it's something that older generations would be wise to create for younger generations.
Why do you say that? Because you've said rite of passage here, and it seems like there's a rite of passage element with becoming a father here right now as well. Do you think that there's what is it you gained from the first one, and you think you're gaining from this one, and why should more people undergo rites of passage?
I don't know if I would even put it in terms of what you're gaining. It's in terms of, I mean, so a 14-year-old boy is not a man.
Right.
We can agree on that. What it is that makes a man, and I don't know, in a kind of philosophical sense, what makes a man a good man, whether or not we even think that language is useful, requires, for the boy to take on those characteristics, it requires him to change in some ways.
Sure.
He's going to undergo a transformation. That transformation is much more likely, I think, to unfold properly if, one, it is conscious, if the boy is aware that I am changing, I am no longer going to be the boy I have been my whole life.
Why do you say that? Why do you say it has to be conscious? Because I could make an argument that if it isn't made conscious, then you can revert back to those old habits on your own, on a whim. And if you're stepping into a new era with a new sense of yourself and new responsibilities, then you can't go back.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And just to know what's expected of you. I mean, if you're not conscious, if you're not explicit about the fact that you are becoming something new, you'll probably change very slowly over the course of your life, but it won't have that sense of seriousness and responsibility that I think is, it just seems to me to be a necessary component of it. Sure. I've actually been thinking about what kind of, I don't have a lot of time now, but I would like to go spend 2 days in a cave or something and come back out before becoming a father, but
Sure.
I don't know if I have time for that. In a way, I feel like this rite of passage over the last couple of months has just been very slowly unfolding of its own accord. Although I think a concentrated, deliberate experience would still be useful somehow.
Okay.
But so what was the question? Why does it have to be conscious?
Yeah.
I guess it seems to me that it won't work otherwise. I mean, you'll change, but you won't. It certainly won't be stark, like you said. There's not that sense of I was this and now I am this.
Right.
Yeah, I just can't imagine it being quite as the sense of self and the sense of responsibility changing as starkly as I think is appropriate.
Okay. And then I was curious what you gained from it, but I think there's also an element where you lose something as well. You lose maybe naivety or you lose immaturity, something along those lines too.
Yeah.
That's
Well, yeah,
probably
I
not-
mean, the way this is classically thought about is that you die and you're born again as
Right,
something
sure,
new.
sure.
So you lose a hell of a lot. You lose the whole world if you do it right.
Right,
You lose
okay.
the whole world, you lose yourself, and then you're born as a new thing in a new world with a new set of responsibilities, with a new place in the world, with an entirely new experience of existence. I
Sure.
mean, it's a fundamental change. It's a fundamental death.
If done
in your
right,
birth.
right?
If done right, yeah.
What do you think? What do you? I suppose you should know. What's Hannah going through as she's undergoing this sort of rite of passage?
I don't.
I should ask. I should preface. You don't have to answer that
Yeah,
if she doesn't want to.
I
You
don't.
don't want
For
to.
one, I don't know that I. I mean, something analogous is occurring. There are
Okay.
very deep psychological transformations.
You think so?
Not dramatic. You know, they're subtle, but
Yeah.
they're deep. I don't know if I could put that into words or if she would want me to.
Sure,
So.
sure. Well, then I'll ask one more question about that, and then if it's not good, then we can go anywhere else. But what do you think your role has been as a soon-to-be father, caring for a woman who is carrying a baby?
How has it been caring for the woman who's carrying for a baby?
Like what have you have to come to realize? What have you noticed? What have you learned? Anything along those lines?
I'm not sure. You mean the specifically caring for her
Right.
component of it?
I mean, I've heard stories where all the hormones go crazy, and now you have to kind of be a stalwart figure and secure the household type of deal. And I've heard stories where things are fine, easy pregnancy. I don't know. I'm just curious what it's like as boyfriend, husband
Yeah.
type of deal.
It's been a fairly easy pregnancy as far as
Really?
that goes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people when they talk about pregnancy, they say it's awful, hormones go crazy, childbirth is a nightmare, and then you never get to sleep, and it's just negative. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to hear that.
Yeah,
It's been fine.
So far, it has been fine. And Hannah and I were talking about this the other day. It's like
Yeah.
we can't know because we're not parents yet, so
Sure,
we might just be naive. But we hear everyone say like, "Oh, you don't sleep anymore. You don't like each other anymore.
Right,
like life
right.
just falls apart when you have a
Yeah.
baby." And we're just both kind of like, we don't really expect that to happen. We expect
Sure.
it to kind of just go on as normal with a baby now. Like,
Sure. That's awesome.
Some very deep psychological transformation,
It's
some
great to
very
hear.
new, some just very new experiences of self. But as far as kind of the details of our everyday life, there's a new responsibility, obviously, but we're not really. Neither of us seem to really expect it to upend everything else.
Okay.
Except maybe upend it in terms of importance. I think that's one thing that everyone agrees upon, is that when you have a baby, there is now the baby and everything else as far as
Sure.
importance goes. Like this
Sure.
is the primary important thing in the world.
Have you done any sort of planning to accommodate that new importance? Like, have you? This is probably farther down the line, but have you thought about how you want to raise your kids?
Oh yeah.
No?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot, talked about it a lot. I don't know how I would summarize it.
At least in baby mode, have you and Hannah planned for it? Thought about how you handle responsibilities, things along those lines?
For like the period when it's still
Right, for
a
the
new
first 2
child,
years, yeah.
first couple years. We're not buying a lot of stuff.
Okay.
I think that is one difference so far. We're determined not to buy a stroller, for example.
Really?
And maybe we will have to succumb later down the line and decide that it's a necessary evil, or just not an evil at all.
Sure.
But we've decided that we'll carry her until we can't carry her, and then she will walk.
That is awesome. No,
Yeah.
I've been thinking about kids and going to Mexico, comparing them with the United States and whatnot,
Yeah.
and it seems like strollers are a bad idea.
That's funny. You've had that same instinct.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Do you have any rationale behind that, or what's your thought? It's fairly intuitive on our ends, but
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a fat piece of lard. I think if you
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no stroller, if there is a stroller there, and kids aren't that heavy. I mean,
Kids aren't that heavy. Yeah, and there's just something about like, I don't know if I want to say it. I'm sure strollers are very, very convenient, and I'm sure that there's a very good reason to have them, and I don't think having a stroller is a bad thing per se, but it just it, we have decided to hold out as long as possible and try to avoid getting one. And that's something we've been thinking a lot about, as well as the way different cultures have raised their children.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of taking a first principles approach, I guess, not taking anything as given. Starting with the fact that life is miserable once you have a baby. People say that.
Sure.
We're just refusing to believe that as
great.
as a given.
Really, really great to hear. What do you make of what do you call the little toys that kids suck on, the babies suck on?
Pacifiers.
Pacifiers. What do you think of pacifiers?
I don't know. I mean, we're not planning on getting one.
Okay.
We're planning on getting very little, frankly.
Gotcha,
We're planning
gotcha.
on.
I've been thinking about all kinds of these little things that we've just been selling for what, the past 100 years rather. It seems like they're cheap ways so you don't have to handle your kid.
Yeah, that's kind of how we feel about it. And I guess it feels, my intuition about it is that if you create a whole world for a child that's full of all kinds of experiences and physical objects which are completely foreign to the rest of the world, which you don't have anymore when you're a grown-up, I feel like it's just, I don't know, it's creating like a kind of schizophrenic experience for the child in a way. It's like, you're creating this kind of alternate reality that they inhabit when they're a child, and then eventually they're expected to no longer inhabit that reality. But why not just give them reality from the get-go? And so, I mean, even like we're certainly gonna. Another thing is we don't plan on buying her like a lot of toys.
Yep, that was gonna be my next
It's
question.
a hell of the world is very interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff to play with.
It's weird when we give kids.
I feel like there's not a need to have things that are specifically for the child necessarily.
Instead of silver spoons, we give them pink little, like, smaller rubber spoons type of deal. And I could start going off on all the things that I've been thinking about, but I don't want to take it too off course, I suppose.
There's an interesting book that Hannah and I both read recently, which I certainly don't agree with everything in the book, but I found it really interesting, and it's partly about raising children. And it's called The Continuum Concept.
The Continuum Concept. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, it's about a woman who goes and travels to some very remote tribe in South America.
Yeah.
And just observes the way they live, and specifically the way that they raise their children.
Okay.
And kind of the assumptions that are built into the culture of bringing up children.
The assumptions there or the assumptions here?
Comparing assumptions,
them.
yeah.
Okay.
So there's kind of the assumption to a large extent, there's an assumption in Western culture. It seems that you have to kind of like pit your will against the will of the child, and like assert your will as the dominant will, and there's a kind of an assumption that they're nasty little creatures to begin with, and that you have to kind of like smack them into shape or something like that. Yeah. And there's probably, I'm sure there's some wisdom in there somewhere. I doubt that's totally wrong, but there's also, it seems to be true in my experience that oftentimes people and the world in general conform to your expectations to a certain extent. Sure. If I'm sitting here and I just expect you to be an asshole, the chances, it's more likely, and I treat you that way, expecting you to be an asshole, I think it's more likely that you're going to become more of an asshole.
I'll get
over the course of
agitated.
Of course. And if I treat you as a friend, you're more likely to respond with friendship. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure all of my ideas about parenting will change over the course of.
It's easy for me as a young single bachelor to speculate about having a kid when I don't even have a girl locked down just yet. So.
Yeah, but I think that's part of the experience. Part of the experience is to go back to that kind of open-mindedness we were talking about before, is to observe the experience and adapt it according to what you discover there.
And to the point about, do you conform to the kid, or do you force do you test your will against the child's will?
Yeah.
And one thing that I've started to notice is that it seems to me that eatable mothers, who in principle
are eatable,
as in like
devouring
mothers,
yeah.
Right? That even them, who are in principle bending to the child's will and giving them everything they want, candy and whatnot, that I think that there's more of a will of the mother to force the candy and the ice cream on the kid.
Oh, interesting.
I think I've seen a mother almost skip dinner so that we can get to dessert and get to the happiness and smiles of the sugar and whatnot.
Yeah.
And almost forcing a kid to, okay, we played for 10 seconds here, and now I just want to give you a phone so you can go be anywhere else but around me.
Right.
Like it seems like it and this is just a couple instances that I've noticed, but there's this forcing the dependency on the kid rather than
Oh, interesting.
letting that kid want it themselves, but they don't actually seem to want to.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's just something I've noticed recently. So it's made me skeptical of trying to be a eatable father and try and efficiently condition my kid to be as monstrous as possible. I've been thinking about, I'd love to teach him Greek, and I'd love to teach him Latin and Spanish and a bunch of different languages, and I got to do it by this age and all of these things. But it seems like a kid's Mother Nature has conditioned kids to learn as efficiently as possible on their own.
Yeah.
So I think I could do it better than Mother Nature.
Yeah.
It's almost hubristic.
Oh yeah, and I mean kids. I mean they're notoriously curious creatures. They want. I don't know what age that starts exactly, but they just want to know the why behind the way everything that is.
It's probably as soon as they get
So
handle on their thumbs.
So in a way, it seems kind of ridiculous. It's kind of a caricature, but it seems like what a lot of us do is say, don't think about all of that. Go do this. Go do your homework or something like that.
Sure.
But it's like from the kid's perspective, the world is intrinsically interesting. So I assume if you just foster that curiosity rather than shutting it down and telling them to go be interested in something else, the world. I mean, they'll just teach. They won't teach themselves, but they'll be inherently curious.
Right. They'll go explore their neighborhood, and they'll learn how to handle their body and learn how to handle pain and learn how to handle the unknown.
Yep.
All the things that go along with not being helicoptered by a helicopter parent.
Yeah. The way you put that makes me think that is a large part of our approach is kind of just getting out of the way to a certain extent and providing what we need to provide for the child, but kind of letting it, just letting Mother Nature do her thing, as you said.
Yeah. Have you read any of Dr. Peterson's work?
I haven't actually, no.
He has.
But I'm curious. Go ahead.
He has one rule in the first 12 rules that says, "Do not let your child do anything that makes you dislike him."
It's funny. That's actually the one thing I have read.
Okay, gotcha.
I got my dad a book of a copy of that book recently, and I flipped through the table of contents and just skipped to that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think because that kind of stands against what we're saying.
Yep. Yeah, I remember feeling that.
That you should be disciplining your kids so that they can be socially acceptable, etc. Because if you don't parent them, then they don't learn manners and they don't make friends, and then nobody wants to play with them.
It's based on the assumption. It's the exact opposite of the assumption of the people described in South America. It's the assumption that the nature of the human being is to be selfish and evil and horrible, and you have to kind of train that out of them.
Right.
Whereas the assumption in this South American tribe is that these are people like ourselves. They're good people. They want to have good social relationships with their community. They want to fit in well. They want to contribute. That they're kind of intrinsically good. And I'm sure both of those is neither is entirely true. But I don't know if you really need to choose between them exactly. I think the child, the human, is a complex creature, and you want to foster what is innately good in it, and you want to not suppress. You don't really want to suppress anything, but you want to put. I don't even know how I would say it. You want to integrate them well into society, and that involves, for lack of a better word, suppressing certain negative parts of the innate human character.
Well, it's.
Although I want to caveat there and say that suppressing is actually a very wrong term for what I'm trying to describe. Integrate perhaps would be better.
Integrate. That's maybe a better word. Yeah. You said that they want to be socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And that's a really important point, because it's not because the way Dr. Peterson almost puts it, maybe I shouldn't be putting these words in his mouth, but the way it seems to me at least is that the kid's impulses are sporadic and not socially acceptable, but then it would be your responsibility to give them the rules, the social rules, so that they can be socially acceptable, because they want to be socially acceptable. Nobody wants to be a social outcast.
Right.
That's kind of the nature of why peer pressure is a bad thing, because people are pressured into doing things that they shouldn't be doing because of the social group or whatnot. But people fall prey to that because they want to be socially acceptable.
Right.
And I kind of, when I was on this road trip, when I was going through Idaho, I got to sit in on some of Aaron's classes. He works at a classical school up there. Some of his classes and some of other teachers' classes as well. And after school, we were kind of talking about some of the things I'd seen and whatnot. It seems to me, and I think it seems to him as well, that the kids are oftentimes kind of testing the teacher to see if they'll put their foot down and establish some rules.
Right.
Because there is maybe I shouldn't give any specifics when it comes to because I'm sure people can hunt down the school and the classes.
The specific kid.
Yeah. But there seems to be that testing of authority, testing to see what the rules are, so that maybe they can learn them themselves. I mean, it's like you said, they want to be socially acceptable.
They want to know what those bounds are. Yeah.
Right.
That seems to be a really part of like the function of play as well. Is when kids are playing together, they're kind of pushing the bounds of what's socially acceptable, and eventually one kid ends up crying, and then the other kid knows, okay, that's the limit. You don't do that.
Right.
You go up to that point, but
you don't bite.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what the whole thing is about, is kind of figuring out what the bounds of the arena of what is socially acceptable are.
Yeah.
And then learning to thrive within that.
Right. You have to.
But I think the point that you said is really important, which is that people want to know what those bounds are because we're inherently social creatures, and we want to get along well with the people around us.
Right.
I'm sure if we have it would be interesting if we have a talk 3 months from now or something, or maybe a year from now after I have some experience with the child,
with the child,
to say which
here
of
are
these
the things that we got wrong.
Yeah,
and here
exactly.
Are the things that we should be doing better. All those things. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe life will be miserable, and it'll be like, oh, that's when. And we'll have a stroller and everything.
Sure, yeah. Like I said earlier, it's easy for me to think of all these ideas without any consequences whatsoever.
Yeah. I think a big thing for me that comes intuitively is to, I mean, it sounds obvious in a way, but just treat the child as a real human being and try to understand their perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah, that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. Understanding people, cultures. At some point, maybe you draw your foot down when they're criminals.
Yeah. Well, even then, it's not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive, because you can put your foot down and understand something at the same time.
Sure.
I mean, you can understand the actions of an individual. You can understand how someone would get to a certain position in which they would do something, a certain thing. But you can also at the same time say that is not acceptable and that it will not be tolerated. So it's this very subtle balance, doing both at the same time. It's like what Hemingway said. I think he nailed it.
Sure.
You gotta, at least if you're a writer, to be a good writer, you have to understand everyone's perspective. To be a good man, you have to know when to put your foot down.
Right. that probably goes with being a father too. At some point, disciplining your kid when they went off the rails too much, broke too many necessary rules.
Yep, and that doesn't mean you stop understanding them.
Right.
And when you're understanding them or trying to understand them, it doesn't mean you're not, sustaining those clear boundaries.
Right.
So they're not mutually exclusive by any means.
Is there anything you're looking to? Because we've been talking a lot about boundaries and where you restrict your kid. Is there anything you want to encourage your kid to do? Any directions in particular would you like to push them towards?
I don't know. I mean, there are, like you said, there's the desire to teach them a bunch of languages and teach her all kinds of skills. I think that will come with time. What I'm more focused on now, and that Hannah and I have been talking about, is the kind of experiences we want to expose her to, especially as a young child.
Oh, so I didn't even know. So she's a she?
She's a she, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I haven't said this.
Congratulations.
I think I may have referred to her as it a couple of times in the course of this conversation as on accident, but she is definitely a she.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Experiences that you want
the kind of experiences, yeah. like we were saying a few minutes ago, the world is inherently interesting, so you only need to push so far to get a child interested in it.
Sure.
So we're thinking more in terms of the kind of experiences that we want a child to experience, and it's, in a way, it corresponds exactly to the kind of experiences that we want more of ourselves, which is kind of fascinating.
Okay.
We want our child to experience the outdoors. We want the child to experience forests, ocean, fire, food, music.
Do you think you'd raise your kid in Savannah?
Probably not long term.
Probably not.
No.
Where would you go?
I don't know. As far as raising the child goes, I think Hannah and I would both really like to be, maybe not the wilderness, but the forest for sure.
Okay. Because now that I've been through just about every big city in the United States, I'll preface this by saying I do admire a lot of the skyscrapers. I admire a lot of the engineering and everything that goes into big cities, but I've basically come to despise them all now.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was not the case. That really wasn't the case before. Especially as a kid, I always dreamed of New York City and all the big ones that I've now been able to go to. But
what is it that you despise?
the big one is the pollution and the trash. I really need to be able to breathe when I go for a morning run. I need to be able to, or just whenever I walk outside my door.
You want to be able to breathe in general.
yes. I mean, breathe good air.
Breathe good air.
Yeah. That's the number one. And it's also good to be able to run uninhibited. So you can there is Central Park and whatnot, but just having, especially for a kid, letting them go run around and tumble and fall.
Yeah.
You can't do that on cement, and you can only run so far when there are cars around everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the world in that sense is restricted in a way that probably isn't.
Right. At least in terms of physical
ideal.
space and the matter on the ground.
Yeah. Hannah and I are both really much more in our element out in the forest than we are in the city. I mean, even Savannah is an extraordinarily beautiful city, and it's extraordinarily forested for a small city.
But even this isn't enough?
But even this, no, we would both really prefer to be in a log cabin with a wood stove out in the woods.
Wow.
Not necessarily like far out in the wilderness or anything, but that's pretty much where we were living in Anacortes before we went to Mexico.
In where?
Anacortes, Washington.
Okay.
We're both from more or less Washington State, and then when we were in Mexico, we were living out in the middle of nowhere. Similarly, just kind of immersed in these rolling hills and forests.
Yeah.
So that's very much our element. It's very much the kind of environment we would prefer to raise a child in. But I don't know. That may not work out for a while. We've talked about going to Maine, but I'm also interested in the University of Chicago, which is very much not like that, obviously.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's all up in the air.
Sure. Anything else that you want? First, I'll actually keep pushing on the nature bit. Why do you want to raise your kid around nature? Why do you think that's important?
For one, it's just the environment in which Hannah and I feel the most at ease.
Sure.
Most in our element. And I don't know. I mean, you get to choose what the child comes to perceive as normal, I guess. Whatever environment the child grows up in will be kind of the foundational normal for the rest of her life, in a sense. And I don't know if I could say why exactly. I just prefer that to be trees moving in the wind and the sound of birds and the sound of coyotes howling at night, and
not the sound of air conditioning and
and the sound of
cars and honking and
fire crackling in the stove, and I just closer to the earth, I guess.
Sure.
I would like the earth to be normal. I mean,
having running, like flowing water.
Yeah, flowing water, absolutely. Yeah. The full moon, the stars. I want all of these. I mean, for me as well. I want these things to be normal for me. I feel.
What do you think?
Dramatically more, like a lot of people, I think, just dramatically more in my element in those kind of conditions.
Why do you say a lot of people?
I don't know. Maybe it's not the case that a lot of people are like that. In my experience, maybe I'm just particularly sensitive or allergic to civilization or something, but I notice that when I go out into the woods, especially at nighttime, and it's quiet, and I see the full moon, and I see the stars, and I have a fire going, and there's some food cooking on the fire or something, I feel like I release a breath that I've been holding for the last years, or however long it's been that I've been living in a city. I just feel like really dramatically more at home with those kind of experiences than I do around buildings and cars.
You also said music. You want to raise your kid around music.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've become skeptical of music over the course of my travels.
You become skeptical of music.
Yeah, at least in its modern conception, especially where everyone has headphones on all of the time, and it's usually very simple, straightforward, predictable music that doesn't challenge you in any way.
Yeah.
But before, say, radio, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to either be very talented yourself, or you had to go find someone very talented.
Yep.
So I've become skeptical of it. I don't want to deny its magnificence when done well. Like when I was in Mexico, there was this baby who was always around, this new baby in our family, and anytime someone started to sing or dance with her, an enormous smile, enormous laughter from this baby. Yeah. Like it was really, really remarkable. I think you lose the specialness of music, obviously, when it's on all the time.
When it becomes a kind of a commodity that you're just expected to have going. Right. Yeah.
So I'm thinking like once a week, something like that. We play music, we have a dance, we do something along those lines.
Yeah, I like that.
But
yeah, when I said music, I should have said this. I meant live music, like people people playing guitars around here and stuff like that. Yeah,
cool.
Not exclusively. I mean, I plan to play music as well, but play music through speakers. I mean,
sure.
But I meant specifically live music, people singing and dancing.
Yeah. What type of music do you listen to? I know we've talked about Leonard Cohen. Like on a speaker, what would you put on around your kid?
All kinds of stuff around the kid. I don't know. Probably fairly simple classical music.
Okay.
Nothing that requires like real effort to appreciate.
Sure.
Which doesn't mean it's not magnificent. Like probably Chopin, or Bach, or Mozart.
Do you think those are simple?
Simple in the sense that everyone finds them beautiful, more or less.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to work to understand why someone would appreciate it.
Who would you have to work to understand?
All kinds of like contemporary 20th century stuff.
Really?
I mean, even Wagner, like a lot of people would concede that his music is beautiful, but
okay.
I don't know. I guess that's not kind of like the straightforward, simple, happy beauty that is appropriate for a child.
Okay.
I don't know why. Schoenberg, all kinds of 20th century stuff that I find gorgeous, but that it's not obviously so.
Why do you think it's important for a kid to be exposed to that type of beauty? Because why shouldn't I listen? Why shouldn't I let them listen to pop music or some of the simple bandas or cumbias?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any reason not to allow them to. I mean, it's really is fairly simple. It's just that there's all kinds of just wanting to expose the child to beautiful things.
Okay.
And not things that are beautiful in ways that it will likely be impossible to understand right at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah, so we would have to push that question back to why expose your child to beautiful things in general.
Right.
Why that's important.
Right.
We can go there if you want, or we can...
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a real theoretical answer to that question. It's more that it's kind of the fundamental principle behind the way that I'm thinking about raising this child, which is, I guess, that I believe that the world is a magnificent, beautiful, and sacred place.
Yeah. And
I want to introduce the child to the world as such.
Sure. What are parts of the world that are not magnificent and sacred and beautiful that you would not want to expose your child to then?
Shopping malls.
Shopping mall? Well, they're on the way out.
The better
anyways.
part of the internet.
But, okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, the shopping malls are on their way out, like you were saying.
Right.
I mean, all kinds of stuff. Maybe most culture, in fact.
Most
but,
of it.
yeah.
When you say culture, I imagine that
culture.
means
Yeah.
pop modern culture type of contemporary culture.
Yeah, I mean, popular culture not necessarily meaning just like the kind of arts that are produced, but also just the culture in the sense of like the assumptions that are underwriting the lifestyles of a lot of people.
Like what assumptions?
I think most people don't. Again, I mean, I don't want to say most people because it feels like I'm criticizing the whole world, and
Sure.
I don't.
Okay.
I have no intention of doing that.
Okay.
I think a lot of people do not live as though the world is sacred, or as though life is sacred,
Yeah.
or even beautiful for that matter, or a blessing or a gift.
So part of it would be that goodness exists at the very least,
Yeah.
or in betterness, that there's some things are more good than others.
Yeah, just that the world is beautiful.
Okay.
And I don't think that requires any like indoctrination or anything, but just I believe that the world is beautiful, and it's just a matter of bringing up the child with exposure to all of those things that I find beautiful.
Sure.
Not forcing them on her, not forcing her to agree that anything is beautiful, but I mean it's fairly simple. It's just this is somebody that I love and that I have the privilege of introducing to the world and to human experience, and that's a hell of a privilege, and I want to do it according to the assumption that human experience is worthwhile,
Yeah.
and that the world is beautiful, and that being alive is good.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of anti-human stuff going around. It's kind of a shame that we assume that the world is, to take a swing at Dr. Peterson, I suppose, to say that life is suffering. You know?
Does he say that?
Yeah,
Life is suffering?
he says that a lot.
I guess the Buddha said that as well.
He takes
So
that
he's-
exactly from the Buddha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think
It's not like the
the
Catholics
word in Sanskrit,
don't-
I believe, is dukkha, which
Yes.
isn't necessarily translated as suffering.
What's the better translation? Do you know?
One translation that I've heard that I like is sour,
Okay.
because suffering sounds kind of dramatic, and
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to me that that's what the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha's teaching is really getting at. Life isn't suffering in the sense of somebody like being tortured or something really painful. It's suffering in the sense that things just don't feel quite right. Something
Okay.
feels kind of misaligned. Things don't feel quite the way they should be. Things aren't really pleasant. There's kind of a persistent nagging feeling of wrongness, which just kind of permeates every day.
Yeah. I can see why suffering's a bad translation then.
Yeah, that's the interpretation of dukkha, which I have found to be most appropriate.
Okay.
Which I think makes the whole religion of Buddhism make the most sense.
Really?
Because I think that's a more accurate representation of, or interpretation of the kind of suffering that really does permeate a lot of people's lives.
Okay.
And like most people aren't crying every night or wailing or sobbing or having any kind of operatic crisis or anything like that. It's just, for a lot of people, a lot of the time, and for myself plenty of the time, there's just kind of this permeating kind of nagging, like life just isn't that great, like it's just kind of sour. Like
Okay.
nothing, most of my minutes on any given day aren't necessarily like really, really enjoyable. It's
Sure.
kind of like there's just some task I got to take care of, I got to do this, and then I have this next thing I have to do, and I don't really want to do any of it, I just kind of
Sure.
have to. It's just life just kind of sucks a little bit sometimes.
Gotcha.
I feel like that's Buddhism makes more sense in reference to, or when you think of dukkha in that sense.
What happens then if your life is serious suffering and
Yeah.
you are getting flagellated and tortured and whatnot? Then
Yeah, and
then
there's
is Buddhism
there's all
is
kinds of
Buddhism
real
enough?
all kinds of real suffering out there.
Right.
Is Buddhism enough? I don't know. I mean, I'm not Buddhist exactly.
I'm not familiar enough with Buddhism to
Yeah, I'm not-
go either way, so I don't know. That's why I'm just asking.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see extreme suffering as the kind of problem that Buddhism is trying to solve.
Okay. What are they? You just think they're trying to solve dukkha then?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, that's a fairly. I mean, that goes really deep. It's not just. It's not just a kind of a trick to help you enjoy your days better. It's a way of essentially uniting with the true nature of things. So I mean, that has more profound metaphysical implications. But that's kind of the psychology is kind of the starting point of all of it, the way I see it. I'm not sure how we got here. Oh, because Jordan Peterson, Life is Suffering.
Oh, Life is Suffering. Right.
How did we get there?
Because you're saying you want to expose your kid and make the argument. It seems to me, maybe I'm putting that word in your mouth.
Yeah.
Make the argument to your kid that life is beautiful, life is good, and that human life is beautiful, human life is valuable, and that you want to expose your kid to that, and maybe exposing your kid to that. Maybe that's why I'm trying to stuff the word argument into your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
By exposing your kid to that, you make the argument to your kid that life is beautiful and valuable.
Yeah. I don't know if I would use the word argument because
Okay.
it's not. I don't know. It's not like this is a position which I'm trying to like rally behind or convince people is true or anything like that. I don't know if I would even use the word good. I feel like beautiful is actually the most appropriate word.
Okay. Well, it seems like it's inherent within the use of the word beautiful that it is also good.
That it is also good.
Yeah. As opposed to ugly, which is
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
And then that's not to say that everything that's good is beautiful, but it seems like everything that's beautiful is good.
Yep. Beautiful in a very broad sense. The reason I'm skeptical to use the word good is because just the word itself feels kind of like it has some moral baggage or some or that the word itself is almost a little bit superficial and kind of implies that life isn't hard or something, which isn't what I mean to imply.
Okay.
Okay. So to go back to Buddhism, actually, I think part of the experience of just kind of basic Buddhist doctrine is that you don't get rid of pain, but you get rid of suffering. That's an interesting distinction. Or dukkha.
Right.
And when you are no longer suffering because you're no longer attached to your conception of the way things should be, which is essentially to say you're no longer in disharmony with the way things actually are, with the nature of things. When you're no longer suffering, then when you're no longer in dukkha, then all kinds of experiences that you might normally ascribe the word suffering to, such as sadness, grief, all of that can be perceived as beautiful. And I believe it is beautiful. I think there's a reason that we find sad music beautiful and we find heartbreaking novels beautiful.
Sure.
So it does. When I say beautiful, it doesn't exclude the full spectrum of human experience.
Okay.
But it kind of underpins that whole experience, that whole spectrum of experience.
Okay. So even when I said that not everything that is good is beautiful, but everything that's beautiful is good, maybe that even has to break down because...
It depends what you mean by good, yeah.
Sure. Because a heartbreak, you could say a heartbreak isn't good, but maybe you learn something from it and take something from it, so it becomes good when it's contextualized. But that...
Or even just the experience itself, regardless of what its consequences are. I mean, it goes back to our experience of art. The experience itself can be deeply, deeply rich. The experience of heartbreak.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're experiencing and that's the reason that we find sad things beautiful when they happen in novels, or we find sad music beautiful.
The blues are a very good example.
Yeah. If you experience something difficult, if you experience something emotionally heavy, but you erase the part of yourself which says this is wrong, this is not how it should be, if you erase the judgment from the experience and you just are actually face to face with the experience itself, rather than having the experience interpreted through a judgment of how things should or should not be. If it's just you and the experience, then your experience of something tragic, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say in theory, it's not as easy in practice.
Of
But
course.
your experience of all kinds of hard, emotionally heavy things can be perceived as beautiful, just as the way they would be beautiful in a novel.
Do you think you would try to expose your kid, maybe encourage is the wrong word, but expose your kid to hardship and heartbreak and dukkha, say?
Expose them to it? I don't know. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's the way I would put it.
Yeah, it didn't feel like the right word, but encourage felt like a much worse word, so I stuck with it.
I mean, the world will do that for her.
Oh, sure.
The world is. I mean, there's no way that she won't be heartbroken at some point in time. So my intention is much more to not even encourage her theoretically necessarily, but create an environment, a kind of micro-cultural space in which that kind of an experience can be interpreted and digested as beautiful.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's sort of a role of fathers that we seem to be neglecting. Is that I don't want to say the word safe space, but you create an environment where a mother can be nurturing, and you create an environment where they can stumble and fall, and you're there to pick them back up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you create an environment of emotional stability,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah.
And what's great is that if you do that, then I think that just naturally translates. If you remain emotionally stable, unmoved, I'm not exactly unmoved, that's not the right word, but emotionally stable in the midst of things that might be destabilizing to the child, then she can learn that that's possible. And she can,
Right.
More importantly, she can learn that fundamentally it's okay. I mean, if she's having a tantrum, if she's feeling heartbroken, if she's having a crisis of some kind, but over and beyond that is a kind of large, imperturbable presence of just steadfast love that's unshakable,
Right.
then all that she is experiencing is occurring within a context which makes what she's experiencing not the end of the world.
Right. So if your unshakable love is there the entire time through all of these ups and downs,
Yep.
then when she hits that down, then it's contextualized this down in a series of ups and downs that are undergirded by that stability.
Yeah, it's held within that context, within
Right.
that larger space and presence.
Right. Do you think that's...
And I think it's so funny. I think you can have that exact kind of a relationship with yourself as well when you observe the different kind of psychological dynamics that occur within yourself. So I feel like I've been practicing being a father for a long time, actually, and I'm becoming a little bit more conscious and a little bit more deliberate about it now, and realizing that okay, what's occurring right now within my psyche in a way is analogous to what's going to occur with the child.
So you're saying you've practiced being a father with yourself?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay. How have you done that over the years?
I mean, to kind of personify it, you can say that there are different parts of your own psyche. I mean, we all collapse and we all freak out and we all have emotional experiences at some time or another.
Yeah.
And when that happens, to allow it to happen, to not try to suppress it, but let it unfold within a larger context of fundamental okayness, of fundamental unwavering love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you can I ask you to define the word love? I know that's a big ask.
I'm not even sure love is the right word there.
Okay.
It might be.
It's just to go back to the compassion point that we talked about at the beginning. A lot of people, it seems to me, use the word love as a synonym for compassion. And
Synonym for compassion?
I think that's in error. Say just to throw that, just to settle that right there.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I have necessarily a better definition. Sometimes I'd say it's the mix between justice and mercy. So mercy would be the side of compassion. It'd be like half the coin.
Oh, interesting.
And then sometimes I'll lean towards a Greek definition, so philia or eros.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets real messy real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think compassion is something. I'm not going to try to provide a definition of love, but it seems to me that compassion is something that naturally issues from love.
Sure. Is there anything else? Would justice seem reasonable, or what else would issue from love?
I mean, yeah, it depends what you mean by justice, I guess. The best interest of the person across from you, so I guess you're right. Compassion is only one part of that, because compassion isn't ever not useful, I don't think, but it's certainly not sufficient. Sure. You certainly need other stuff there. I mean, you've read. I think we talked a while back. You've read the work of Carl Rogers.
Yeah.
That's kind of his fundamental idea. Is that really what? I don't want to put words in his mouth either. It's been a while since I've read his work, but
sure.
The kind of the most important thing in the relationship between a therapist and a patient is, I can't remember the term he uses, unconditional
positive regard.
Unconditional positive regard. Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. I think that's pretty close to. I think that's a good theoretical label for what happens naturally when you're living according to the principle of love. Not even the principle of love. That doesn't sound right. When you're living a loving life, that is what naturally happens.
Sure.
Unconditional positive regard.
But that does seem to me to be more of a mark for compassion. I mean, maybe we're just on
unconditional positive regard.
Right. Just at some point you have to put your foot down and punish the criminal. Say.
Yeah, punish the criminal. You said.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, do you remember Theodore Dalrymple, Anthony Daniels, when he came to talk to us?
Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote a book called Life at the Bottom. He was a psychiatrist, and he often found people who were told, who would come in and. Because they were mandated by the criminal system, mm-hmm. and they were expecting to be told, here's all the reasons why I have an excuse for why it is the way I am. Mm. And he would often have to say, you are the way you are because you've chosen to go down this path, and you are a bad person for doing so. Putting his foot down and not exactly having compassion, not exactly having unconditional positive regard, say.
Yeah. I wonder in that context, though, what the use of doing that is.
Usually, the patient would laugh, because they would be expecting that unconditional positive regard. And they'd almost be relieved in that someone's willing to tell it to them like it is. But it's also a little bit of a different scenario, because that's a psychiatric appointment that's appointed by the state. That's not exactly... Like, if you're in a clinical setting, generally it's because you voluntarily want to be there. So you kind of have to defend Rogers. You have to have this willingness.
It's a different context.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You have to have this humility to want to change. So in order to do that, you have to have someone who's willing to meet you where you are, which is probably very low. So you need to have compassion for that.
Yeah.
So argument for and against, I suppose.
I gotta go use the restroom, but if you want to keep talking when I get back, that sounds good.
Sure.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
How's it been going?
It is now recording again.
Right on.
So. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. So you just said that you would be interested in going back to listen to this years down the road because this is a pivotal moment. I wonder if other people will feel that way who are on the podcast. I mean, podcasts have only been around for so long, so they didn't, because it's a new medium. I don't know if people go do that. I don't know if people go on Joe Rogan's podcast and then look back at it 10 years later, because there aren't, it's not like Joe Rogan's podcast has been, I think it's 11 years old, something like that. It's not old enough to be able to be nostalgic just yet, it seems.
Yeah, maybe not quite.
Yeah. That'd be cool. That'd be so cool. So part of the reason I've kind of wanted to start this podcast is I think it'd be a great opportunity to make more friends, to go out and talk to people.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe I build this friendship network, and then I guess you'll be able to track me as I learn and talk to people and whatnot too. But it'd be a cool marker to invite friends on, or soon to be friends, and use that as markers throughout their lives too.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
When I dream about my life as a podcaster, it seems like it'd be so good if I can pull this off.
So are you really hoping to make this kind of like your main
So.
profession?
I think it'll be the hub for a bunch of other ambitions that I have. I think it's
Okay,
going to be
nice.
the central thing that I'm going to focus on, at least for a while, trying to get this thing off the ground.
Cool. So you were talking a while back about going to do a PhD. Are you still thinking of doing that within the next couple of years, or is that kind of postponed a little bit?
I think I've turned against it now.
Really?
Yeah, because now I'm going to say a bunch of things that might get me in trouble on the podcast, but the way it seems to me is that if I do a PhD, then I'm going to classes where I'm learning from, maybe I get into a very good school and I get the first-rate professors, but generally it'll be a second-rate professor, and they'll be teaching a lecture that nobody wants to listen to because everyone's going to be on their phones or pulling out their laptops and going shopping or whatever online.
You think
anyways.
so?
That's what I've noticed in college.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
I imagine a PhD program is a little different.
It's probably
culture.
different at PhD. Yeah, absolutely. Smaller classes and you're more one-on-one time with the professor. There is that mentorship aspect. That's
Yeah.
an argument against what I'm doing. But I have learned way more reading on my own than I ever did in school.
Really?
Other than Ralston, but Ralston's definitely an exceptional case.
Okay.
And a lot of what I learned at Ralston was just through reading Aristotle, say, or Augustine, or what have you too. But
Right.
I figure if I have a list of all the books and the people that I want to get through. I figure if I build this curriculum on my own and keep reading and keep learning on my own, then I'll do. Part of the good thing about working on my own with this podcast as opposed to working for a PhD is that if you're working on a PhD, in principle you're working 40-hour weeks. I can just work 80-hour weeks on this and hopefully build this into something great and keep learning it and call up the best professors in the world and ask them to be my professor for a class.
Hours.
Yeah. I mean that'd be the best thing. That'd be the best thing ever. That'd be the best education ever.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in a way, that comes back to what we were talking about a little, kind of at the beginning of this, of breadth versus depth, I guess.
right. And
I mean, in a way, what you're doing is intellectually traveling all over the world rather than settling down somewhere.
sure.
Which I think is probably a great thing. I mean, it has its costs as well.
Right.
To not specialize in one thing.
And one of those costs is lacking the discipline of a thesis, say. Like it's a big deal when you're going through your PhD program and getting a thesis. You go so deep in that.
Yep.
And I don't want to.
And you become an expert on that subject in theory.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think though. I think. I mean, we'll see as I set out on this journey, but I think I can pull off getting that depth on my own.
Really.
So maybe I'm naive to say that, but I mean I'm familiar enough with genetics and neuroscience to know the big players in the field at their points in history.
Okay.
I think if I can just go read their books, read their principal works, principal papers, I think I can get it on my own.
Cool.
And not to mention all the life skills that I'm gonna attain by doing this podcast, calling up people, learning to email people, learning to shake hands and make friends and get people comfortable and essentially building a small business.
Right. So at this point, you don't have. I mean, you're interviewing your friends. You don't have enough of a history to really call anyone real famous up or anything like that. Probably.
Well, with Ralston, I mean, I imagine I can work some connections there.
You have some connections there. Yeah, that's true. Is there anyone that you're specifically hoping to have on in the near future?
In the near future.
As far as like something of a big name would go.
Well, the ideal would
someone
be,
besides just me sitting on our back porch.
I got you. The ideal would be build up enough of a resume so I can email Dr. Peterson and bring him on. Because I think that'll be the thing that can boost me forward as much as possible.
Especially if you have a really good conversation with him.
Right. No, that means a lot of preparation, a lot of practice beforehand, making sure that really goes well.
Yep.
So that means also.
So he's kind of the first one as far as
the big dogs, yeah.
As far as someone real well known.
Right.
Nice.
Because there are a handful of groups that I do want to hit along the way as I build up the resume, and some of those are going to be through Ralston, some of those are going to be academics seem to, even Nobel laureates, seem to give lectures and go on podcasts with very little views. So
Really?
maybe it's like the podcaster's working connection somehow behind the scenes. But I've seen some really remarkably famous people, at least in academia, that go on small podcasts. So I bet there's more I can do there.
Yeah.
I want to talk to artists. I don't think there's a market for artists whatsoever, but I think
On podcasts, you
on
mean?
podcasts. I don't think people
To talk about their work, what they do.
and the nature of art itself and beauty.
Okay,
It's
nice.
as well. Like I said, I don't think there's a market for that, but I would love to talk to artists, and I think it's a great way to keep building my resume too.
Yep.
And hopefully, I'd love to be proved wrong, of course, on that. But I'd also, part of my goal, I have a bunch of goals with this podcast. One goal would be to change the way we talk about art and the way we talk about beauty, giving people the vocabulary to do so. For example, whenever I mentioned this when I was talking with Andrew yesterday. Whenever I talk to people about art or beauty, and I use the word beautiful, I'll leave it at that. And I use the word beautiful, they'll often use some sort of synonym, a bad synonym for it. So they'll use pretty or nice or sweet, something along those lines.
When describing art.
Interesting.
Interesting.
The exceptions are something beautiful, but the exception seems to be nature. People describe nature as beautiful. That's pretty much it, though. There are very few contexts when modern people use the word beautiful. So I'd like to change that. I'd like to give people the vocabulary to talk about it. And I'd
Interesting.
like to talk to artists so I can start doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of a heavy concept. Beautiful.
Right. Because
It's kind of like, even when I think in other languages, like in French, the word beau doesn't have quite the same the same heft to it as the English word beautiful does.
Sure.
It's like a real kind of
beautiful,
idea.
Three syllables right there.
Yeah.
And then the other, there's actually probably a couple more, but another group of people I'd like to hit are video game developers.
Oh, interesting.
I don't play any video games anymore, but I respect the craft and everything that goes into making video games.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody online talks to video game developers, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because gamers have no social skills, but I think guarantee there's going to be a market for it. And since no one talks to them, maybe that just means I can swoop in and talk to them. So there's a couple ways I'm trying to build the resume, build the channel, and work my way towards Dr. Peterson. So
Nice.
I think it'd also be good to talk to parents as well. I don't think there's about being a parent.
About being a parent?
Right. I don't think there are a lot of people doing that out there, and I bet you there's a market for that too. And I think it'll be really good for young people to hear that too.
For young people going to be parents? Or
For young
what do you mean
people
by
in
young
general,
people?
young people who are lost and aimless, like we were sort of alluding to earlier.
It'll be good to hear about parenting.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because I don't think we do it at all. At the very least, we don't do it enough. It isn't obvious to me that we do it at all. Encourage young people to be parents.
Oh, encourage them to be parents. That's kind of the idea. Okay.
Right. Yes. Yeah. To regard it in a positive light. Talk about some of the reality. I mean, you have to talk about some of the hardships too, but everyone always talks about the hardships. So that's kind of why I was interested in hearing that Hannah's having a good time with her pregnancy.
Yeah.
That's not a story you ever hear. So,
Yeah.
So poke at the assumptions. And that's kind of what you've been saying too.
Yeah.
Seeing what holds up, and seeing what people go through, what their experiences are like. I mean, the trouble with trying to talk to parents is that it becomes very personal very quickly.
It does.
So
yeah,
it'll be hard, especially at first, getting people to open up in general, let alone getting someone to open up about something that personal.
Yeah.
And I guess it'll get harder as my audience grows too. Because right now, I mean, we're talking in front of principal, the 100 people that I'm gonna send this to, type of deal, and maybe a dozen of them will watch it or listen to it. But eventually, it'll be, hopefully one day, millions of people listening to this, and then it's a guaranteed. Oh, everyone knows how you parent your kids. Because one thing, I'm not super familiar with this, how it works online, but it seems, from what I've gathered, is that people love to criticize how you parent your kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, everyone. I mean, that's one of those
Everyone.
cases where people feel really certain that whatever they're doing is the right thing.
Right, that's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when everyone knows best.
Yeah.
That's the hurdle that I'm having the most trouble doing. Even for myself, just trying to get people comfortable on the podcast talking about things. Because even sitting down here, I'm paying attention to the air conditioning that just popped on. I'm hearing every single bird in the background. I'm paying attention to them, and not giving you enough attention in this conversation.
Interesting. Are you doing that because you're interested in thinking about the way this is going to sound later on, or what's
a bit of that,
just
and it's a bit
making
of
sure that it works?
nervousness too.
Okay.
But yes, I'm still thoroughly paying attention to everything. There's a whole lot that goes on when it comes to making a podcast behind the scenes. And I knew it was complicated, but I didn't give it enough credit. Just
Okay.
we're not recording video, but especially when it comes to video and lighting and camera work, and I'm probably gonna have to make a thumbnail for this video too, and everything that goes into that.
Yep.
So. But I'll learn a lot doing this. I mean, I've learned a lot in the past 24 hours of doing this. So
Is this a brand new idea?
I've been thinking about it for. It's been on and off in my head for probably 5 years now.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I talked about it with some of my roommates in college, but and I've always thought about doing something on YouTube, whether it's short films or podcasts or whatever else.
Yep.
But this is really the first time that I've really set my heart to it and tried to hit it hard.
Nice.
I think I've decided I seriously want to commit to it towards the end of the road trip. So a couple months ago, 3 or 4 months ago now. Because I recorded something with an old roommate of mine at the end of the road trip. That's when it was. And I did it on my laptop and with my phone, and we were standing things up on cardboard boxes, and it was kind of just a mess, but it was good to sit down and practice having a conversation in front of a camera, getting comfortable.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be able to use it to help my friends too. Like if Anand writes a book one day, then he can come on the podcast and promote it. That'd be awesome.
Yep.
If anyone wants to catch up, shoot, I'll invite him over and sit down for 3 hours and catch up with him. The weird thing is, though, is that means everyone I know is going to be monitoring my progress all the time. Like you can see my views in real time, you're gonna see my subscribers in real time. I'll get very self-conscious very quickly. That's gonna be the big hurdle with this, is just getting over the first year or two of getting no views, putting in the work, and feel like I'm getting nothing out of it, just hitting the grind, practicing, learning, all of that until it picks off. Because all the big guys, they take forever till they start making something of themselves.
Forever to do what?
To start getting real views, to start making
Really?
any money off of it, yeah. Unless you're already very famous. But
Right.
then you also had that period of no one knew you until you were a famous boxer, and then you're Mike Tyson, and then you start your podcast, and then
Right.
you've already put in the work of being a nobody in another domain. I think I can do it, though. I think I
Yeah.
got it.
Yep, I think you can.
Why do you think I can?
You seem committed to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to hear.
I know you'll work hard at it.
Cool.
And you're good at having conversations. So you've got connections. I think you've got everything you need right there.
Cool. I appreciate that. Anything else you want to say before we sign off then?
Nothing specific, no.
Okay. Good talking to you, dude.
Good talking to you as well. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.